everyone to our diversity session. In today's session, we will explore the value of diversity and how to break down those barriers. As people living in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2021, hopefully we are all familiar with the Maori proverb that ponders, he ahe, te mihi nui, o te ahu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. The meaning roughly translates as, what is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, the people, the people. In a sector facing the many challenges we're touching on this week, and whose future success will be incredibly reliant on its people, developing its people and working with people all around a multicultural world, it's a good place to start a discussion on diversity. It is part of our roadmap to correct the fork in the road. This address today is a call to action and an opportunity to highlight an increasingly urgent need to move away from thinking, if that's what we're doing, to acting. Diversity should not make us feel uncomfortable. It should be normal, business as usual, value add. It's not just about one or two people. It's embracing a complete and diverse position in order to deliver what we need to do. Whatever we go on to achieve, our people will always be the foundation on which that success is built. And we need to respect, welcome, embrace, and nurture diversity as a key that can unlock opportunities that can help our sector operate as something far more than the sum of its parts. Something we need now more than ever, with the tremendous pressure that we all feel to get on with it and drive economic contribution in the post-COVID world. There is little point and little real value in being the smartest person in the room if we've all lived the same life and think the same way. That can take us only so far. It is our differences that will provide the disruptive value add that we require when we collaboratively bring our differences to a problem. As the old saying goes, doing what we've always done will only get us so far. It won't be a different or a better outcome. Diversity is a topic of significant personal interest to me, and it is exactly what it says on the tin. It is not just gender and race, although for some reason that seems to be where our thinking starts and in some cases stops. It's thought, it's age, both young and old, it's how we use technology, and the list goes on. Diversity, in my view, is relevant to nearly every single aspect of what we do as an industry and what we need to deliver, not least including the need to progress at pace across the country, address a labour shortage, future-proof our infrastructure, ensure it is fit for purpose and safe, and ensure that our communities are great places to live. And of course, increasing diversity on its own doesn't produce results. We need to reshape our power structures and shift momentum. And look, there's any amount of evidence that shows that diversity is important, and we know the benefits that diversity can offer. What we've got to ask ourselves is, what is stopping us from moving towards embedding this stuff at a personal and organisational level, and really making diversity part of our normal business and the way in which we operate? What else is it that we need to do to create a talent pipeline and a sector that people want to belong to? It's taking too long. This discussion really dates back to a few years ago when at the 2016 Building Nations Infrastructure Conference, Infrastructure New Zealand established the New Zealand Women in Infrastructure Network to increase the number of women in leadership roles and to provide a networking and support group for women in the infrastructure sector. In 2017, the WIN Advisory Board undertook a survey on diversity and inclusion in the sector. The results showed that the underrepresentation of women was perceived to be a real issue, and that while many organisations had goals to increase the representation of women, progress was slow to moderate at best, and some needed assistance on how to make that happen. WIN initiatives aim to address this, and we'll talk a little bit about that further on. Now, 5 years on since it started, the network has a membership of over 2,100 women across 7 chapters in New Zealand, demonstrating that there is a real need for that network, and at INZ we will continue to support that. We are proud to facilitate a diverse network of women at all levels across the New Zealand infrastructure sector and connect to the global WIN network operating in Canada, United States, United Kingdom and Australia. Alongside that initiative, Infrastructure New Zealand also established the Emerging Talent Network to foster the development of the next generation of infrastructure leaders. It facilitates cross-sector networking opportunities for young leaders under the age of 35, providing practical career development advice and a greater understanding of the infrastructure landscape, a chance to learn from experienced practitioners and develop long-standing professional networks. It too now has a really solid membership base, just sitting at under 1,000, covering a range of professionals including lawyers, engineers, bankers and the public sector, with 2 chapters operating in Auckland and Wellington. A Christchurch chapter is in the works, again indicating that our sector can do much more to nurture and foster its talent. But it's not just about the numbers, it's about the culture. It's about creating an environment where diversity is normalising. It's about catching up on the skills that we need and how we plug those gaps. At the same time, our industry needs to change to meet these challenges. Our world is changing too. And I believe that diversity and what we've learned from our recent shared adversity can help with those challenges. So, for example, if we're really serious about climate change, why would we fly people overseas when we can meet virtually from home and make use of those expert skills in the same way? COVID-19 has certainly taught us that it is possible to work effectively whilst operating remotely from each other. It's another way that we can access skills, the skills we need, by doing good also to the planet. We all have a role in saving the planet, as we've heard earlier this week. We no longer operate as a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 sector. Actually, I don't think we ever have. We now operate 24/7 business, but we don't actually need people to be in the office. And we heard from Ian Golding at the start of our conference that he talked about exploring those opportunities and really taking advantage of the opportunities that COVID-19 has created for us. And I believe these are gold-plated opportunities for us to think outside the box, to challenge the accepted convention and think diversely. We do not train the people we need and all of the skills we require in New Zealand. We are losing people because of better pay and better opportunities elsewhere. That skills drain is often, but not always, about money. Employees, and particularly our younger ones, have expectations of additional opportunities and need to see employers making good social contributions. These sorts of initiatives can make a difference. They will help retain staff, build trust, better working relationships, create opportunities, and more importantly, assist staff in well-being, making them both better people and better employees. At the same time, many of us have set out to be employers of choice in order to attract the right staff to our organisations. But my question is, do we really live it? How many of us, if we choose to, could make considerable further progress? How many of us are truly curious about our staff? What else can you do which might be useful to you, your business and its staff? One other thought about our people. The construction sector was quite literally spotlighted on the Auckland Harbour Bridge with the mates and construction flags flying over the last couple of weeks. As I mentioned previously, has one of the highest suicide rates of any in New Zealand. The infrastructure sector can be a blokey sector, where soft people skills may not often come to the fore, and a demographic not renowned for being open. Again, that background of culture of diversity and inclusion is absolutely the right thing to be doing. But it's also something that's easily forgotten in the heat of the competition to win that next contract. So what do we do about it? Diversity is an increasingly necessary part of leading people and achieving success. It can be done. The Infrastructure New Zealand Board will be considering the role and future and function of diversity as part of our wider strategy and will be providing further updates shortly. I'm a massive fan of the adage that if you don't measure it, it doesn't happen. I would love to see measures including gender, ethnicity, age, and employee pipeline. Qualitative measures examining how people feel about their employers' efforts to embed a culture of diversity and inclusion might be very telling, but a good thing to do, because if it's not challenged, it won't change, and we need to do that. I also challenge you to be an enabler and a champion of diversity in all its forms. As we will hear from Alia shortly, diversity is an increasingly common theme across many high-performing organisations, including at the elite levels of sport and in the military, where lives are literally on the line. Diversity was a driving force behind the establishment of the Special Air Force Service in World War II, at a time when doing things differently was literally saving lives. As you'll hear from Alia, there are a multitude of examples of high-performing organisations across many sectors, and our sector also needs to be there. So it's my very great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker for this session, Alia Bojilova. We've practiced that earlier, but she did say I can also call her Major B. Alia has been described, and I'm sure you'll agree after hearing her speak, as insightful, inspiring, energetic, and restlessly committed to doing better always. She has specialised in resilience and leadership for over 15 years as a leader, consultant, and a coach. As a registered psychologist, Alia has coached, consulted, and facilitated at the highest levels of complexity. She has served as an enabler to thousands of leaders and teams in some of the most intricate environments globally and in New Zealand. Alia's deep passions are in making bold ways to build, broaden, and nurture the resilience of individuals, teams, and organisations in strategic alignment and commitment, and fueling curiosity and insatiable appetite for growth and contribution. As a leader, Alia has worked in a wide range of sectors, including government, venture capital, peak performance sports, the commercial sector, creative industries, education, health, and not-for-profit. Alia, really looking forward to your presentation. If we do have time at the end of the session, Alia will take questions, but I think we've got a lot of ground to cover, so over to you, Alia.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Namai Haramai, Zdravейте, welcome. I'm Dr. Alia Bojilova, and one of the favorite things I have is that I am a passionate and proud collector of rich narratives. I've selected a few of those for you today because they paint a powerful picture of where we might need to direct our gaze. Most of us in this audience, I am sure, have had an abundant exposure to the subject of the value of diversity of thought. Willingly, consciously, or otherwise, we have been talking about this for some time. I will not aim to entertain us with the obvious today, but I will ask us to please leave some room for the common. The very title of my talk today, The Value of Diverse Thinking, should have left some of you feel a little uneasy. If you're like me, it is because this title paints the value of diverse thinking as an add-on, a nice to have, something to perhaps consider after everything else is sorted. For some of us, it may leave us a little uneasy because it reminds us again we have to do it. With this, a disclosure for me. I will not argue for the value of diverse thinking today. chiefly because I see no positive value without it. Every context I have been exposed to, from the military through to venture space and everything else in between, has shown us that we cannot do without it. My thesis is there's no point stepping forward without diverse thinking if we aim to get to anywhere worth going. So, knowing we all realize that, and we have all been familiar with what it means to live in and thrive in a VUCA space, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, I'd like us to reframe the question from the very start. We will spend some time thinking about how do we create the conditions within which diverse thinking can thrive so that we too can do the same. But first, I'd like us to please start with an element of audit. Shortly, I'm going to introduce you to a series of questions. I'd like you to step away from the screen and just listen to those questions. And I also would like to please invite you not to judge them. These are questions that I get to confront on a daily basis from some of the most remarkable talent that I get to work with. They're questions that are oftentimes shared with me in confidence or in despair, sometimes both. If you have long resolved these questions for yourselves, to the benefit of the immense and indisputable value of diversity of thought, then congratulations. But you will know that these questions still persist in many of the dark corridors that we walk past. I will read each of the questions to you, and I will leave you with 10 to 30 seconds time to reflect. 10 to 30 seconds to notice your instinctual response, your first response. Now, note, these are big questions. Each of these questions deserves a book or a chapter in a book, and they most certainly invite deep thought, irrespective of how you feel about them. So, with the time that I'm giving each of them, I'm not being mean, I'm being realistic. Time and reflection is not a luxury most of us have, or we think we don't. It is most certainly, from my observations, not something that we tend to engage with when it comes to the power and the value of diversity of thought, and most importantly, how do we create the conditions for us to access that? So, please consider your current context. Hopefully today, in this present moment, there aren't too many great stresses upon you other than making sense of my accent and trying to remain deeply engaged in the presentation that I'm about to give you. Notice your instinctual response, the first thought or emotion that sparks in you when you hear the questions. Then consider your usual context. The sorts of environments within which there is stress, competition for resources, exhaustion, tension, perhaps mistrust, the usual stuff. After I read each question, I might share a context here and there. Importantly, I will not be asking you to share your responses or views unless you really want to. I simply invite you to observe your first thought, your reaction, and to do so without judgment. Let's travel through some of those. Here is the most common one. What is the value of diverse thinking? Can you quantify that value for me? Is there a time and place for it? That question is given to me quite often because of the context I come from. Historically military, these days venture, both spaces appear to be perceived as ones of high pressure. And there's a sense that perhaps we can take advantage of the value of diverse thinking when we can sit together around the table, kumbaya, hold hands, and reflect. But then when the battle starts, we focus on the sorts of things that we have committed to, and we step away from that diverse thinking. Is there a time and place for it? Here's another question that I get to hear very often, and it's a benevolent question, albeit with an odd outcome in my mind at least. How do we make room for it? How do we make room for it? Every time I hear this question, the first thought I have, and I cannot check this out, is, wait, where is this room situated? What is that room for diverse thinking? Who holds the key? Who goes in there? How often can they come out? Who visits? How do we make room for it? There are more questions too. Wait, what is it? What is diverse thinking really? Whenever we have fancy subjects such as this, things that appear to be in the space of academic research only, we tend to forget or we tend to not understand at the beginning when these concepts begin to be introduced to us what they are about. And then suddenly we find ourselves a little cautious to ask the deeper questions around them. How will we know it when we see it? I like this question a lot because it suggests that it must come from some sort of diverse source. Now, what that is a subject to interpretation. There is the usual, but the usual doesn't always have to come with the power and the delivery that it's supposed to promise. This itself presents a whole heap of challenges. Because then the next question is this thinking diverse enough? How do I know that it's on some sort of realm of diversity and the range of diversity that it delivers actually contributes in a way I expect it to? I like that last question too. It usually comes as a quiet little scream. Why are we still talking about this? And I get to hear this last question typically from the very people who are supposed to be entrusted to have mastered that diverse thinking thing. It doesn't come from a place of judgment, but from a place of utmost curiosity. It really is about, why is that a no-brainer for us? We have seen it, we have witnessed it, we have plenty of evidence to invite it. What is slowing us down? Perhaps what's slowing us down is the lack of awareness of what it really is, and that has taken some time for us to get to. Let's walk through some examples. The word on the street is, and you have all heard it, it has all been sold to us, that diversity of thought, diverse thinking, is supposed to sponsor and enhance our creativity. It has offered to us to help us win the war on talent. That war on talent thing has featured in our thinking for the longest of time, and now we have some pertinent evidence of how powerful it actually is. It is supposed to be the backbone of what affords organizations, teams, and even individuals competitive advantage. It's fancied as the sort of thing that helps enable and sustain positive, benevolent, meaningful, powerful culture. And it's supposed to enhance and build trust. In many cases, the word on the street is, we kind of have to. We kind of have to get this thing going, whatever it might look like for us. But the blunt reality is, the value of diverse thinking and the way in which we have addressed and oriented towards that has caused almost as much positive delivery as it has negative. It isn't about the innate value of it. It is about the ways in which we have engaged with it. So let's explore this a little further. I'd like us to walk to a different kind of corridor now. I'd like us to really think a little bit about recent times in history when we have attempted to interject with a little bit of diversity of thought. Here are some examples of negative unintended consequences of what diversity of thought may have been misconstrued to mean. The reality is, it has led to such things as oversized shoulder pads in trying to fit in. Some have claimed that they have arrived at color blindness, missing out on the very essence of what this is supposed to deliver. For many who are seen to be able to contribute with diversity of thought, it has felt that the very individual that they are is supposed to carry the burden of everyone that they are seen to be a part of. Irrespective of where we are in our obvious diversity of thought continuum, what it has led to in many cases is people folding themselves into a pretzel, trying to just fit in into something that is poorly understood. Along the way, we have been missing the mark on the very thing that it's supposed to achieve. So let's explore a little further. A part of this big dilemma around the value of diversity of thought or diverse thinking is that we oftentimes confuse ourselves as to what and how it must fit with diversity. We don't have time for this big question today, but there is something for us to ponder on. Where must it come from? How do we know it when we see it? There is more to it too. There are more important questions. And these sorts of questions you may have heard about before. Peter Hinson, He spoke to us about the three horizons. Him, along with many countless others, have talked for the longest of time that there is no such thing as linear thinking. Diversity of thought is supposed to disrupt that exact thing. Diverse thinking might be invited, but it never really influences. Peter calls it the stuff of yesterday stays unaware of it. So it doesn't matter how much of it might be accessible to us. What matters is to what extent does it help, change, influence, and shape the context within which we exist and the context we aspire to create for ourselves and those around us. The reality is that we have perhaps learned to demonstrate some degree of openness and acceptance, but we quickly kick into biases and defense mechanisms that do the exact opposite of what they intended to do. There is a well-established cadence to what we do, a flow that ensures synchronicity, direction, and alignment, but takes away from the ambiguous and complex opportunity that we have for ourselves in our space. The questions that I'd like us to ponder on today: yes, what is it? Yes, what does it do? But most importantly, what does diversity of thinking need in order for it to achieve what it promises to achieve? That is the very important question I'd like us to explore today. To help along the way, I need to give you a little bit of a backdrop here. I spend the vast majority of my time in context where diversity of thought, diverse thinking, isn't just a nice to have. It is an absolute must have by virtue of survival. Every micro moment of connection matters, and in those moments, the conditions within which diverse thought is invited are crucial. But the rules are different. Let's explore a little further. As a deeper dive in the context, some of the environments or the conditions within which I developed my commitment and appetite for this particular topic, it's been a while. But the time when my focus crystallized was in 2013 and 2014. At the time, as a military officer, I was selected to serve in one of the oldest UN military missions, UNSO, United Nations Truce Supervision Organization. It is a huge honor for any officer to be a part of this mission, simply because it has been there for some time and it operates in incredibly complex terrains, always has. About 140 military officers are selected from 42 troop contributing countries globally to be a part of this mission. Once in headquarters for the mission, they get distributed across 5 different countries: Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Egypt, to serve for a minimum of a year in some of the most complex environments. Individuals deployed to this mission represent the countries and are oftentimes deployed to isolated locations. They need to form and be a part of a team with people that they haven't met before, who come from different cultural contexts. In fairness, with people that they may not even like, but they must be prepared to support and protect with their own lives, because that's what the conditions and the context and our commitment is about. Most importantly, they need to thrive and support a mission that is long-standing in an environment of acute ambiguity and unpredictability. When I was deployed to this mission, just in the brink of my being sent there, it became evident somehow that female officers had a particular way of being able to negotiate really complex scenarios without escalating. Syria at the time in 2013 and 14 was one of the most complex environments we had. And as one of only 2 officers in this 140 shipment that the mission had just received, I was quickly sent to Syria. We got to experience firsthand in many complex environments precisely what that anecdotal evidence was about. But it all crystallized in May 2013 when myself and 2 of my colleagues were taken hostage in Syria. 3 of us, unarmed, were taken hostage by 38 heavily armed militia members. The intent of this, as our militia members stipulated, the hostage takers stipulated, was that they wanted to make a bad video of us. And videos of decapitation were commonly used by warring parties to demonstrate commitment to their mission. We were overpowered, and the commitment of our hostage takers left very little room for us to contemplate and escape. And yet, we managed to talk our way out of our predicament. My actions in this were recognized, and at the time it was assumed that I had displayed remarkable ability to control and regulate my emotions and find a way to find a common ground with what might have otherwise been my worst adversary. The reality on the ground from my team, they argued I talked so much and I asked so many questions from our hostage takers that they got tired of being asked questions. They got tired of my curiosity and then they set us free. The truth was that our hostage takers had struggled that I could recognize. They looked and acted very much like my cousins back in Bulgaria. The pain that they had come with meant that it made it impossible for me not to understand, not to want to know more, not to want to see what sits behind that mask of aggression. When I came back to New Zealand sometime later, I was voluntold to commit to my academic research and enhance my career by starting my PhD in the area of resilience. The goal there was that we had realized it wasn't enough for us to just recover. We wanted to condition and learn precisely how we can anticipate, how we can grow from every setback, how we can create the conditions within which more of us wondered whether and how they can think their way out of a predicament, even if it might be with the worst adversary. How we might learn the appetite to explore complex terrains with those around us, no matter who they were. And most importantly, how we can seek rather than avoid opportunities. I went back to one NZSAS and the Counter-Terrorist Tactics Group, a group that I had spent 6 years serving along with prior to this. Remarkably, or maybe not, what we discovered is that the backbone of resilience was precisely what helped us in our hostage scenario in Syria. Curiosity. Curiosity, critically underpinned by diversity of thought, was fundamental for resilience in environments where complexity, ambiguity, change, and unpredictability are the absolute norm. And guess what? I spent my youth writing this, studying along with some of these combatants, thinking about the micro moments when critical decisions were made, as well as what it took for those capabilities to be developed prior. And it dawned on us really, really quickly that none of this was actually new. The power of diversity of thought, the true value of it, had been known for the longest of time. Diversity of thought was seen as vital necessity by those in 1940. When one NZSAS was initially formed, it was on the back of a truck. A bunch of misfits were put on it. Misfits who appeared to ask too many questions, who appeared to explore from a different angle in an environment that was quite traditional. In an environment such as military service, a concept such as first amongst equals, which means everyone's word matters no matter their rank and background. No sense of class at a time in history when that was what defined whether one would be a soldier or an officer, as in decision maker or an executor. Humor and humility that connected and built deep trust between people. And most importantly, unrelenting pursuit of excellence, fundamentally underpinned by diversity of thought. These were the critical indicators and the tenets of one NZSAS, or of the essays that now have continued and prevailed throughout time. We went on further. We spent some time wondering, we spent some time trying to work out what does it take, not just to understand what diversity of thought was about and how it actually served real time, but most importantly, what and how were the conditions for diversity of thought built into the fabric of those teams that are able to operate and thrive in ambiguity. Now, to take you a step back, environments such as these are individuals who are supposed to be prepared, and teams who are supposed to be prepared to operate behind enemy lines without resupply, be that physical, emotional, or otherwise, and who have to maintain commitment to the mission that they were entrusted with without that contact. They were entrusted with being able to evolve and enhance that mission and to see themselves to a whole new level of performance and capability. After some reflection, we concluded that some really critical component needed to be had in that context in order for us to be able to deliver diversity of thought and to actually benefit from what it promises to deliver. And whilst I thought that our environment was relatively unique, it transpired very quickly that other teams around the world have been focusing on much the same challenge. The Times were demanding that study to be had. After a little while, it became apparent that another team, Propel Performance Group, had invested some time focusing on championship teams. Starting off from the right-hand side there with the Gorillas team, a team that delivers vital and essential needs on the back of bicycles. They've just hit the second $2 billion investment. One of the best teams in the world, the female All Blacks, was part of that research too. Formula One, the Stanford University surgical team, and the All Blacks. You can see New Zealand features heavily. 7-year study of championship teams is what they called it. And what they consistently identified across the board is that the reason why they had competitive advantage was the ability to invite, nurture, and sustain diversity of thought. The practical examples, the evidence of what that meant for them, included the fact that within the Stanford surgical teams, everybody's opinion needed to matter equally. First amongst equals, much like 1941 on the back of a truck in an Egyptian desert. The reason for that is that they insisted, as you're wheeling a patient out of a helicopter into a surgical room, then the person cleaning the floors needed to be able to report on the little micro moments that they noticed. The relationship between everyone in the team needed to be such that they found themselves willing and able to contribute with insights, even if they just felt like a bit of a hint. Formula One team, I can never remember how long it takes to change a tire. What matters is that these perfect little moments, the micro moments within which a mission needs to be executed, are executed to perfection because the level of trust has been built that everyone's unique perspective will be able to contribute. Diversity of thought requires a sense of trust, being able to predict another person's movement because they are so willing to share themselves with you. San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, an environment within which different instruments can create an extraordinary shared experience by appreciating the domains within which they each thrive and the shared mission. Loads of different indicators, loads of different environments that consistently put the same question. It is not only about what it is. What it is something that we need to continuously evolve as an understanding of it. What matters most is what does diversity of thought need? The team that I was working along with the research that we had contributed with here, turned this into something that they call Sesame Street Simple, the ABCD model. Awareness, belonging, capabilities, the critical one there being curiosity and drive. Those are the things that the value of diversity of thought requires. Here is a little line that I really like to share with you. The reason why these factors really do matter is that you see 80% of our thoughts are apparently negative. 70 to 80% of them are repeated daily. Now, Dr. David didn't mean to highlight that we are a grumpy bunch of people. What he wanted to highlight to us is that what has become habitual and instinctive can sometimes be negative because it tries to protect us. It is extremely difficult for diverse perspectives to sip in an environment that is repetitive and that looks to find faults. To fight against defense mechanism isn't necessarily the most inviting space to be. So let's explore those 4 components so that we can better understand what diversity of thought really needs. Awareness, step 1. In my old team, the one at SAS, they used to say that awareness is the selection gate to the value of diverse thinking. In our team, they used to say you have to start off with firm feet on the ground, eyes, hearts, and minds wide open. In order for this to support diversity of thought, it demands situational awareness, self-awareness, and awareness of others. Yes, it demands that we need to have the habit of unteaching the knowing and instead being prepared to hear, feel, and see things from a different angle, as if it is for the first time. As it was in our context of surviving a hostage taking, what helped us there is that good old thing, listening to understand as opposed to respond or defend. Do we notice what has not been said? Those subtle and vital openings in between. This is where diversity of thought lives. The value of diverse thinking, though, is only accessible in an environment where there is emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. Sam, an SAS mentor for many of us, used to say that there is no point queuing up top talent with diverse perspectives and asking them to observe and explore complex and wicked challenge from the same set of binoculars. And frankly, this is what we often do. Come along, diverse thought. Please fit in a little more, a little too diverse. Big mistake. These factors, they come with trust. They demand it too. In a highly trusting environment, self-interest reduces. If there was a continuum, on the one side of it, we observe less tendency to assert and control to the exclusion of others, and on the other side, higher likelihood of diverse viewpoints to be communicated, explored, and to influence. Trust also takes me to the next step, belonging. Our old team used to say, belonging is what gravity is to a cosmonaut. Without it, we drift aimlessly and off course. In my team, they argued that trusting in others is not enough to gain the value of diverse thinking, however. You also have to feel trusted. Trust and being trusted is a motto, a pillar of what they call enabling belonging. Change, threat, and ambiguity, they take us as they find us. And belonging is like a well in a drought, but not all wells are made equal. Whether and how we belong is a measure of culture. Like it or not, great or poor, every team and organization has one. Teams thriving through diverse thinking demonstrate that fitting in is futile. They engage in non-linear, exploratory, probabilistic thinking as well as in collaborative ways. And this is what the 7-year research championship team showed us. It really comes to the question of, am I going to be a passive observer, a participant, or an active influencer in this context? It also challenges us to accept and enable, not in spite of, but because of the very differences that everyone brings with a perspective. As it was in our team, they used to say, accepted and belonging, warts and all. Not in spite of, but because of those differences. My dear friend, Dr. Anita Sen says, belonging is being invited to a party, but welcome through the main door and onto the dance floor, having selected your soundtrack for the dance. We don't do that well. And that stunts the very value of diverse thinking, if it ever arrives to the party. No matter the trials we face, the question, does this context deplete or fuel me, is absolutely critical in determining the extent and the willingness to which diversity of thought is invited and able to participate in co-creating the future that we aim for. One of the most important lessons we learned in our hostage taking and subsequently to that as well is the power of curiosity. And that is fundamentally about the value of diverse thinking. Curiosity is a critical enabler of resilience, yes. It is the way and the best contribution of diverse thinking. It turns worry, rumination, and rumination into anticipation. It turns fear into excitement about the possibilities we're about to explore. It shifts us from a narrowed to focused attention. And that is critical when we're talking about complex problems and big, rich opportunities that we are trying to pursue. It broadens perspective. It bridges dissonance through connecting and enriching motivation. There are all these benefits to curiosity, and we all know them. But what we do know is that it only exists in environments that are enabling. It requires enabling conditions, environments of trust, again. For most of us mortal humans, it is extremely challenging to be curious and to communicate those curiosities when you also feel stressed out or in some way constricted by your environment. And so, in order for us to have the value of diversity of thought, we have to create the conditions within which curiosity can thrive, trust and enabling conditions. The final step in this ABCD flow, as I mentioned earlier, is drive. In our team, we emphasize consistently the power of drive, the importance of drive. Every context in which we all are, every selection, framework, and process we focus on talks about it. The trick there is, though, that purpose precedes drive. Drive is essential for gaining the benefits of diverse thinking. For us to be driven, however, we need to feel that the purpose we serve and are a part of is meaningful, relevant, and all-engulfing. Again, this is precisely the lessons learned that we gained from the 7-year research in championship teams. There is a caveat again. It is difficult to gather or grasp any thought, let alone a diverse one, that sits on a periphery of possible when you are gasping for air, balancing endless folders of dusty expectations in your pursuit. What we have learned from some of the environments that are able to perform through the power of diversity of thinking and thrive through this is that they have remarkable discipline around what to focus on and when. Environments that thrive through diverse thinking, they mandate that we need to master the discipline of traveling light. Purpose precedes drive, but we cannot act driven when we are overwhelmed by the irrelevant. There is a whole lot of work for us to do in this space. And again, what I wanted to invite us to do is to consider how we will take advantage of diverse thinking as a vital necessity. Every context where that has been tested has shown that we cannot move forward to any place of value without it. What's more important than what is the value of diverse thinking is what it needs. And again, that is awareness, belonging, capability, and crucially curiosity, as well as drive. And finally, if all else fails, one of the most important aspects of diversity of thought is the way in which we engage with everyone around us. One of my favorite teams and the ones that I have been most honored to spend some time with, the New Zealand Female All Blacks team, has this as the value that defines leadership and the ability to shape diversity of thought. No matter what we do, leave mana in your wake. And on that thought, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing how you thrive through diversity of thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. A fantastic presentation and really challenging our thinking and challenging us to approach things in a different way. We've probably got time for just one question, if I may. What skills should our children be learning now to ensure that we have the right skills and resources for the future?
I know I'm biased, having spent so much time in this space, but I cannot think of anything more important than curiosity. Curiosity about every nuance, including the way in which we feel and sit in a time and space. Self-curiosity, curiosity about others, most importantly. Being able to sit with diverse perspectives, understanding and respecting them as deeply as you can. That is, I think, the single most important gift we can gift ourselves and those around us, especially children. Luckily, they have an abundance of it.
Yeah, but sadly, we seem to try and take it out of them through the process, don't we?
Absolutely.
The boxes, yeah. And then perhaps just finishing up on, as a female leader, what lessons would you have for your younger self?
I must say, this must be me being raised by a very, very supportive parent, father of mine, who was also a military officer himself. I guess one of the learnings that I had from him, without any hesitation, would be that whoever you are and however you come with is a strength if you allow it and you understand your capabilities. I would probably not allow myself to question whether I should be doing things that I wanted to do because I'm a female or not. And I think it's just, that's really, again, that self-curiosity, understanding one's own motivations and carving a path that is deeply meaningful to me without hesitation is something that I'd probably say to myself.
Thank you. Alia, thank you for that great presentation that has really set the scene as we move into the panel session, which is going to talk about breaking down the barriers. And I think you've certainly given us a huge amount of food for thought in terms of how we continue to break down those barriers. Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated. Matu wai.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you all.
Okay, as I said, we're now going to move into the panel discussion, which will be traversing how we break down the barriers. This session will be led by and facilitated by INZ board member Katrina van Houtte. So Katrina is a construction and dispute resolution partner in Dentons, Kensington, Swan, and works with major projects and advises clients across the wider infrastructure sector. Before that, she was one of Fletcher Building's senior legal counsel, where she advised all of the business units of Fletcher Construction and was closely involved in supporting the business and interiors business through significant challenges while sitting on the senior leadership team. She was a member of the project governance team for some of Fletcher Building's most significant projects. She is a leader in the infrastructure and legal communities, having worked as an in-house lawyer and external advisor on some of the most challenging projects in the sector. She has a deep understanding of the whole industry and what drives good outcomes on projects. And again, we heard reference to the importance of understanding what drives those good outcomes earlier today from Minister Wood. And she also has a great understanding of the insight into the structural problems in the way that major projects are procured in New Zealand. She believes these problems are holding New Zealand back from delivering world-class infrastructure, and I don't think you get too many arguments about that, Katrina. She enjoys engaging in thought leadership around contentious issues, such as the role of the engineer to the project and provisions in the NZS 3910 that need improvement. Katrina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, for that kind introduction. Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to the Breaking Down Barriers panel discussion here at Building Nations this year. It's widely recognised that one of the biggest challenges facing the infrastructure sector is resourcing and that ever-present skills shortage. Yet the industry is still struggling to attract and retain a diverse workforce. Women make up only 18% of the construction-related workforce in New Zealand, and Māori and Pacifica are underrepresented in both skilled professions and leadership level. So part of the solution must be to improve the industry's ability to attract, retain, and promote a more diverse workforce. So in this session, we'll be exploring the challenges facing the sector, and we'll be discussing options for how these could be resolved. So I'd now like to introduce this fantastic panel. First off, we have Amy Barrett. Amy is the General Manager, New Business and Commercial for Downer's Utilities business. Amy has 8 years experience in leadership roles at Downer and over 20 years experience across the infrastructure sector internationally. Amy is part of Ngā Kaitiaki o Te Ara Whanake, which is a division of Downer that focuses on Māori culture development and the development of Māori leaders. Amy also chairs Infrastructure New Zealand's Women in Infrastructure Advisory Board. We also have Nicky Smith. Nicky is a chartered professional engineer with nearly 30 years experience in civil construction and maintenance and is currently Business Development Manager at Heb Construction. Nicky is currently completing her PhD at the University of Auckland on the retention and advancement of women in engineering to understand better why women leave the profession and what can be done to stop them leaving. We also have Peter Reidy. Peter is the Chief Executive Construction at Fletcher Building. Prior to joining Fletcher, he was Chief Executive of KiwiRail, and before that, Peter held a number of senior leadership roles with Downer Group, Todd Energy, and Freightways. Peter also joins us today wearing his other hat as co-chair of the New Zealand Construction Sector Accord. Gracen Luka also joins us. Gracen is the chair of Infrastructure New Zealand's Emerging Talent Committee. Gracen is an Associate Development Manager in the Land Development team at Fletcher Living and has experience working on the successful Schools 2 and Schools 3 PPPs and a number of other large infrastructure projects. Simon Dyne is a chartered professional engineer and the Chief Operating Officer Infrastructure at Fulton Hogan. Simon is a current board member of Allied Asphalt, Rodney Aggregates, Stevenson Aggregates, Stevenson Concrete, Auckland Harbour Bridge Alliance, and the Capital Journeys NOC contract, to name just a few of his governance commitments. And last but not least, of course, is Megan Main. Megan is an experienced chief executive who has just taken up her new appointment this week as chief executive at the Accident Compensation Corporation, ACC. Until last month, Megan led the MIQ function at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And Megan's previous role within MB was Deputy Chief Executive of Corporate Governance and Information Group. Megan was previously Chief Executive at New Zealand Health Partnerships and Health Purchasing Victoria. Megan brings a perspective to our panel outside of purely the infrastructure sector, and we are looking forward to her insights. So to start off, each panellist will have 4 minutes only to comment on what they see as the most significant challenges facing the attraction, retention and advancement of a diverse workforce in the infrastructure sector. So Amy, I'll hand over to you first to kick off.
Thanks, Katrina. Kia ora koutou. 4 minutes, right. Goodness, I could talk for hours on it, so I'm going to get to the point. So the first challenge that I can see, and this relates mainly to attracting diverse talent, is that we have a bit of an image problem in our sector. So we all use infrastructure, right? It's for everyone. It supports our communities. It makes a difference to how we sort of commute to work, to what we see on Netflix, the water we drink, the education our kids get at school. It makes a real difference. And it's a highly collaborative industry. We work in teams, we partner, and it takes a huge range of skill sets to develop, build and maintain infrastructure. It's something that no one individual entity can go it alone to do. But I think that there are many groups who look at our industry and they don't see all of that good stuff. They don't see the community support and the teamwork and the collaboration and the innovation and the new technologies and all of the really good stuff. So they think of dirt and dust and heavy manual labour and hard-nosed commercials and disputes and old-fashioned attitudes. And they don't see the women leaders, the Māori and Pacifica leaders rising through the ranks. And I think we know inside our industry that there are many very rewarding roles for everyone, and that many of those outside perceptions are actually really becoming quite outdated. But those outdated perceptions are enough to dissuade people from our industry. So that's why I see it as a bit of an image problem. So that's probably, my challenge number one. The second group of challenges that I see is around retention and advancement. So whether we like it or not, we've got a pretty long established traditional industry in most places. And while there is a really strong commitment to diversity and inclusion amongst nearly all of the largest players now, and there's real progress being made, there are still some challenges, which and many of them are actually structural. So one of the examples of a structural challenge that I'd point out would be site-based roles, which are traditionally very inflexible. So, you've got a fixed early morning start time, long hours, and those things are quite difficult with family commitments. Physical labour means that direct supervision is usually required. So if you're a young site engineer and you're thinking, I might have a family one day and I want to be able to support that family with, flexible hours or part-time work, you might think that maybe switching to an office job would make that more possible. So perhaps you might move on to a support function. And there's no problem with that, apart from that it takes you outside of what's a very traditional career route in our industry into operational leadership. So site engineer, project manager, project director, and into regional managers, et cetera. I think we've all seen that. So once you step away from that kind of power centre of operations, it can be more difficult, certainly in the contractor world, to then advance on to the most senior roles. And we know that we need diversity in those most senior roles, not just because it stimulates innovation and it's been proven to improve performance, but because the people in our senior roles are our role models, right? So for women, for Māori, for Pacifica, to see people like us amongst our leadership, it shows us that it's possible, progression's possible, and then we can strive towards it. So perhaps later, I might talk a little bit more around, change in this space.
Thanks, Amy. Peter, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, kia ora tātou. Welcome, and look, Amy, there's actually quite a few things here that resonate with me. I think when I think through this, I'd point to three challenges. One is our industry, and Amy, you talked a bit about it. It's the hours are not attractive. It's not flexible. Historically, our sector's had quite a top-down approach. Construction is conflict. It's a conflicted industry. You have a lot of collaboration, but it can be quite fractious. It's a high trade and technical environment that doesn't suit a lot of people. A lot of young people coming in now looking for environments that aren't so hierarchical, and construction has tended to be like that. So I think in our sector, we have some dynamics that are probably not that attractive to gender, youth, etc. The second issue, though, I think the biggest issue, to me, this is cultural, and you've seen the organisations and firms that have got on top of this. They've taken a whole organisation or firm approach. It starts with being, and I love Dr. Alia's discussion before. It starts with being curious and courageous. And I think unless you have that approach and mindset, cultural mindset, you're just not going to get this. So I think some firms go, well, where do we start? So there's a cultural issue that it's about changing values. And the third issue, I think, as we go through is, a lot of our people just don't have the skills at the local site level to deal with a diverse workforce. Very strong on technical and trades and how to construct, but actually trying to deal with a diverse workforce is a bit different. So how do we coach and how do we train? And if there's a cultural mindset and support to the organisation, and a lot of us have seen it, you can pull people through. And I was involved in one organisation that we had a very strong bottom-up approach, so get ideas from the bottom up. But culturally, you've got to have in the sector a safe environment for people to challenge status quo, for people to come up with ideas. So 3 things for me in terms of challenges: some sector dynamics, particularly around flexibility; 2, cultural change and cultural mindsets from leaders; and thirdly, just giving our people the skills at the local level as some of the challenges and to help them overcome some of the barriers. Because quite often you'll find in our sector, and I've found it myself, you don't quite know where the barriers are. There's barriers going on. I'm learning every day about barriers that our people face. Then unless you have a bottom-up culture that explores that, it's pretty difficult to take those barriers down.
Thanks, Peter. I really like that approach of bottom-up ideas. I think we could all do more of that. Nicky, how does this align with your research?
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. Kia ora koutou. So yeah, I'm currently doing my PhD research on the retention of women in engineering. So, obviously diversity and diversity of thought, like Dr. Alia said, is wider than just that, but I'll definitely stick to the stuff that I know. And although we know we have issues attracting women into the sector, what we see low numbers studying, and then we lose women along the way. So we have them leaving at a higher rate than men. So what that means is that obviously it's a male-dominated industry, but as we get up into leadership roles, we have even fewer women. So our young women coming in have fewer role models. And what we also see is that we've got fewer women, I guess, at that area of influence where they can start to influence change in the culture, which is some of the stuff that Peter talked about. What I found in my studies, the key to retention is career satisfaction, which is probably no surprise to anybody. And what influences that career satisfaction is 2 things. It's having influence and it's having inclusion, which is Dr. Alia sort of spoke about, that belonging. And influence is having access to development roles, being able to influence change. What we also see is that our women more so than our men, really want to have a purpose in the work that they do. They like to know that they're making a difference. So that area of influence is really important. And then there's inclusion, and inclusion is two-dimensional. So we talk about belonging, but we also have this value authenticity. So that's that encouraging people to be themselves. It's the accepting and encouraging differences and that value of diverse thinking. So if we have an environment where we do value that diverse thinking and we're expecting or encouraging our women to present themselves with all their female traits and their differences, then we're starting to have inclusion rather than what we often see as assimilation, where women are welcomed into part of the team as long as they don't rock the boat and as long as they conform to what is now a very male-dominated culture. So the three key factors that I've found in my study for retaining and advancing women in engineering is access to development roles, enabling women to be their authentic selves, and access to influential relationships. So that access to development roles are those stretch roles that give us all, some challenge and enable us to advance our career. And what we often find is their subconscious bias, and some of those really chunky roles aren't offered to women, or managers are making decisions on what they think women want to do, whether they want to be prioritising family, work over family, or having off-site or offshore assignments. So often managers are already making a decision about whether a female wants to take on those roles. So the other one is authentic self, which is, women don't necessarily want to be, treated as special or singled out, but that can then translate into them downplaying some of their female traits because they see that those female traits make them appear less suited to the role of engineer or construction worker. So the more we can celebrate the differences that all people bring, the more we're encouraging people to bring those differences and be their authentic selves. And then the other one, the last one, is influential relationships. So what we see is women and minorities are often excluded from some of those informal networks. Those informal network groups have normally evolved over time, being led by the majority and normally based on the interests of the majority. So it's about making sure we have opportunities, diverse opportunities for those informal network. So not always just meeting at the pub after work, which doesn't always suit some of our women that are trying to balance family and work, and to be able to sort of do stuff out of work doesn't always work for them. And what we know is that building those informal networks and having those relationships is really key to both career satisfaction and promotions, which is really key to retention of our women. So what we know is that engineering and construction is significantly male dominated, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So we don't have the numbers coming through to be able to change it quickly. So what we can do is try and reduce the impact of the culture, which has been designed by males to suit males, so that we can just, I guess, tone down some of that culture and really enable our women to thrive in those situations.
Thanks very much, Nicky. That concept of access to influential relationships is interesting. Here at Dentons, we talk about sponsorship as opposed to mentoring. We say that women and minorities tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. That sort of lifting up and introducing to those influential relationships and networks is actually part of what's needed. So Simon, interested in your insights. Oh, sure, we've just lost Simon for a moment, so we will move on to Gracen.
Kia ora tātou. Ko te ahi a te atua te maunga, ko wai te karo te awa, ko Ngāti Porou toku iwi, no Tamaki Makorua hau, ke Fletcher living aho e mahi ana, ko Gracen toku ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone. I'm pleased to be involved today and really great to hear the other panelists and us kind of resonating with the same responses. So that's pretty positive. I have a confession to make. Before I started writing this speech, I kind of went into autopilot and probably did what most of my generation did and does, and Googled, what is diversity, brackets, short answer. So just, reaffirm that I was on the right path. So diversity, for anyone that's wondering, means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing their individual differences. So obviously that's race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, education, and, the list really goes on. And I think that really demonstrates how large this conversation can be, which led me to kind of think about my own journey and how I got into the sector, which for me was actually pure chance and luck. I never imagined this career, and I couldn't be what I couldn't see. And for me, that really speaks volumes and reiterates the importance of deliberate intervention to ensure diversity through our workforce, because the more you know, the luckier you get. So I guess my 3 challenges that I'd wrote down, although I want to steal some of the others, human capital shortage. So throughout this Building Nations conference, there have been numerous conversations around this talent shortage that we're experiencing in the industry. Some have even referenced it as the Great Resignation. So mix in some aging population, declining fertility rates, and a large portion of my generation ready to get on the first flight to London, Sydney, or Amsterdam as soon as the borders open, and it sounds like we might have an issue. So with this challenge literally knocking on our door, do we think diversity will flourish, or will old habits resume as attracting diverse talent gets harder and harder and more businesses have to compete? So I ask those listening, from a business perspective, what's your point of difference? And then lack of purpose, which has been touched on, and I'll talk a bit later on, and how I think that can kind of be overcome. And then finally, community, which was also covered around, it's one thing to employ people through social outcome programs or with the diversity framework in mind, but it's a whole nother thing to retain them and make them feel welcome and part of the business and its DNA. If there isn't a continued wraparound support, people usually revert back to their status quo or ultimately quit the industry. Thanks.
Great points there, Gracen. Simon, have we got you back?
I think so. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, great.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I think I feel a little bit unqualified after listening to Alia and then Nicky, but so I'll just run this from what I've seen from my perspective and some of my observations. So you asked 3 parts of the question: attraction, retention, and advancement. And in my view, it starts at the very top. And by that, I'm meaning the board and senior management. And they have to truly value and embrace diversity and differences of opinion. So if you have your leaders that aren't open to debate and healthy debate and questioning and curiosity, then you're going to shut it down really, really quickly. And I guess the other thing is being consciously aware of bias, and Nicky mentioned that as well. But everyone has some bias, but if you're actually aware of it, you can actually drive it out and think about those opportunities for change, and that requires trust, but it also requires senior management to actually deal with people that are blocking. And Alia talked about the dark corridors, and every business will have staff that are at the senior management or at the management level that aren't behaving appropriately, and they actually need to be sorted out and dealt with. Otherwise, you're not going to get the people coming through that are diverse. Then you've got to start at the bottom as well. So that's the top, and then there's the bottom. And Nicky also mentioned this, but we've got to build the bottom of the triangle. We have to have the people coming through engineering school or coming through our trade training. And, diversity is more important than just, male and female. It is culture, skills, LGBT. It's all of those things. And we've got this infrastructure skills centre that's been started up by the industry, but you go through that and you realise there's a lot of youth that actually don't understand what infrastructure is about and the opportunities that are there. And that's where there's an opportunity for things like social media or just different ways to engage with the youth to show them that there are actually opportunities to get trade training, to get to growth and development. And then there's things, like the women in infrastructure, the girls in high vis. So that's a great initiative where, women engineers or managers go into the schools. And at the end of that women in high vis, 95% of the students are saying that they've got confidence that they have a place to play in the construction industry. There's Rock for the Future, which is an AQA initiative in schools, engineering scholarships, Southern Initiative. So you've got to build the blocks at the bottom as well. Then once you get the people in there, the diverse people that we all want, it's about, getting people to actually stick and to flourish. And the young woman engineer Kumaroa from Downers yesterday, she talked about mentoring. And Anita, who's the regional manager for Fulton, Hogan and the Bay of Plenty, she also talks about the great mentor that she had that, said that you can achieve anything and stick to it. Need to celebrate success. We're not always good at that as engineers. And, there's some great female role models out there, and not just female, Māori Pacific, like I said, LGBT, different cultures. And you've just got to celebrate those and highlight them. And then people actually look up to leaders and they see there is an opportunity for me to grow and develop. Flexibility, we've heard about. There's an initiative we've started in Stevenson's Quarry where we are actually targeting mums and dads that are doing the school drop-off with part shifts and providing flexibility so people can come after the drop-off, work a part shift, or come after school pickup and work a night shift. So, we need to be flexible, and we also need that for youth, because youth aren't interested in the 60 hours a week. That's sort of yesterday's sort of news. And then there's things like culture, like in the Auckland office, we've actually got because we have a large amount of Muslim employees, and again, it just saves people having to go off to the mosque, and they can actually pray in the office. And that's the sort of thing you just need to do and understand to encourage diversity. But I'll start I'll finish where I started, which is leadership, and that is the key. You just cannot afford to accept people that are blocking diversity or that just aren't acting and leading in the right way. And if you can stamp that out, then and build from the bottom, then we're to getting a better future. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. So, Megan, did that resonate with you and your experience of other sectors?
Thanks, Katrina. Absolutely. It's the challenges are the same. We might be, it's in the public sector at a slightly different point, but we've got the same challenges and the same aspirations. So, one difference I think is the public sector's more than 50% female, but we've got a real vertical challenge when it comes to gender diversity. And, back to Gracen's point, diversity, it covers so much more than gender, and gender alone isn't enough. But I think some of the things you learn through focusing on gender can then be extended to a broader, more diverse mindset. I guess I'm a bit of a stereotype, I'm afraid, and you might kick me out because I'm one of those engineers that left engineering. I started out in manufacturing. I worked in a steel mill in the steel cap boots and the fire retardant suit, and it was actually frustration with that role that inadvertently led me to the public health system back in Australia, and that was the beginning of a long and passionate career of public service. And my experience going from the steel industry to a hospital, when I had my first child, we had childcare on site back in the mid 2000s, and so that meant it really was defining for my career, I would say, because I went back to work earlier than I would have otherwise, and I was able to do both better than I could probably have done either. So that's just my little experience. At the moment, the gender pay gap here in the New Zealand public sector is 8.6%, and so it was 30%. No, sorry, it was. Let me get my numbers right. It was 18.5% in 2000. So it's improved a lot, but it's improved most in the last few years. And the reason it's shifted a lot in the last few years is we've invested time and, frankly, money in closing that gap. And that helps with attraction. It helps with retention. Vertical is much harder. I've just joined ACC, so I tipped the balance of our exec here to be 50-50, and that is in a sector that is also fairly female dominated. I saw some research recently that in the UK, male nurses were twice as likely as female nurses to become executives. And if you think about how the difference in early in career of males versus females in nursing, it's something like 1 to 50. I think that brings back to the point that Nicky and Simon have both made about subconscious bias. Even in a female-dominated sector like health, you still have what I believe is a mix of subconscious bias and just that inevitable, the challenges that as others have talked about of women juggling family and career versus men. And, you know, I think what sort of signal does that send to young female nurses who look up and, more, you know, the majority of the people running the hospital are male? And, you know, and what does that do to shape the future? So even if we've got good, you know, on paper, gender diversity, we've still got a lot of work to do. And where we've moved with diversity, I've just come from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. You know, we were moving heavily into ethnic diversity, looking at the experience that Māori and Pacifica have in wanting to work for MB and coming to work. And we did some really deep reflection with our employees on their experience, and it was pretty confronting. And, you know, one of the things we found was I think our Māori staff had to apply on average 8 times more than a Pākehā employee to get that promotion. And so we've really rethought how we do internal promotion so that we make it a much more comfortable process for people, whatever their ethnicity is. And that really brings me to just one last quick point. I absolutely agree with Simon that this is about leadership. And if we don't, as leaders, think differently, challenge ourselves, expose our own biases, it's going to be really hard to lead the organisations into being a much more diverse organisation. And I won't rehash all of the reasons it really matters to have diversity in our organisations. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. So now we're going to ask the panellists to come up with their ideas for the solutions. So what are the key initiatives that should be adopted to address this challenge? What's currently underway that might be interesting for others to hear about, and what seems to be working so far? So Gracen, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess I was reading a thought leadership piece on LinkedIn the other day by Guy Thorpe around hiring for cultural fit or cultural add-on. And so he kind of speaks to hiring for cultural fit seeks to hire and retain more of what is already working for you. Culture add-on focuses on gaining valuable elements that your culture lacks or desires. So in other words, culture fit preserves comfort and familiarity, while culture add-on for people who value an organization's standards and culture, but also brings something different that positively contributes to your company. So I think that really stuck with me and kind of drove my initiatives. First of all, mindset. There are a lot of success stories when it comes to businesses getting it right. Some, great policies, initiatives that help to set the infrastructure sector up for the future, but we need to encourage more of this, whether that's refining what's already in place or creating new ones. And why? Because this is what will help embed it into everyone's DNA in the infrastructure sector. Strategic investment in human capital. So I talked previously about, that massive deficit that we're experiencing. Well, I guess it's time to start putting our money where our mouth is and putting some serious investment. I know it's challenging when you're trying to fill a role, and although someone may have potential, they lose out as you need someone ready to hit the ground running. Tying into the conference's fork in the road theme, are we to continue as we are and keep making these excuses, or can we make some strategic and deliberate investments to ensure we future-proof our industry today? There's great examples, like at Fletcher's, we have Whakatupu, a Building Futures program delivered through a Māori lens. So developing Aotearoa's pipeline for leaders and supervisors with a key focus on increasing Māori representation in leadership role. And I know many other businesses run very similar initiatives, which is fantastic, and I encourage more to do so. And then there's also some really fantastic external initiatives for getting youth into the sector, like Future Leaders, Tuatoa, First Foundation, Girl Boss, Keystone, and many more. Just get involved, as everyone needs to do their part. Because if we do not plant knowledge when young, it will not give us shade when we're old. And finally, purpose. The purpose of life is a life of purpose. That's what my dad used to tell me. Low purpose and, if you don't have purpose and, minimal development opportunities, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a high turnover. It's one thing to hire with a diversity mindset. It's another to retain them. Ensuring you provide opportunities to leverage and listen to those younger voices is critical. I particularly find a lot of purpose in my own networks that I'm involved in. For example, Infrastructure New Zealand's ET network, and also working within Fletcher Living and our sustainability working group. It really gives you more opportunity to connect with others, grow, and further your own communities. Infrastructure provides the services that enable societies to function and thrive. We need to ensure the disconnect is not lost through delivery and all hearts and minds are along for the journey. Growth is uncomfortable. You have to embrace the discomfort if you want to expand. And finally, I'd echo Margaret's challenge at the very start of this session around be the champion of diversity in all its forms.
Thanks, Gracen. Simon, a question has popped up that looks ideal for you. I wonder if I can ask you that. And
Sure.
that is that construction projects are often quite program driven towards an outcome. And how do you avoid this sometimes linear and hierarchical approach, stifling diverse thinking?
Well, I guess Alia mentioned before. Is it a separate topic, diversity or diverse thinking, or is it just included in your everyday? And I think when you think about it, there's we run things like Last Planner, and we do plan out our programs, and we do hold ourselves to account for timelines. But there's often smart ways, and Peter would have been the same, and Nicky and the other contractors, where someone actually comes with an out-of-the-box idea, and suddenly what you conventionally thought was the way you were going to build it, like precast piers on bridge abutments that we did in the Taramakaua River recently. That's how you do it, because if you're actually not challenging yourself or having some idea sessions every day, you're just not going to change the way you do things. We'll be building roads the same in 50 years as we are today. So I think it does have a place in every day. Good question, though.
Procurement has a role too, doesn't it? I mean, 6-day contract programs in order to meet the client's procurement, driver for the opening date for the facility. It's hard, I suppose. Just more diverse thinking around split shifts and flexible working is probably needed, rather than just the old traditional expectation of the one person will work all of those hours and those 6 days.
Yeah, I mean, procurement can drive better outcomes, or it can drive worse outcomes, can't it? But again, when you have clients that are collaborative, these are all, buzzwords at the moment, aren't they? Collaboration, sustainability, broader outcomes, but they're all real, because they can actually drive things that are better and faster and quicker or more sustainable. So, it is a good example. If you get the procurement right with the right team, and then sometimes, sometimes that's not your team. Sometimes that's the competitor's team. You just need to be mature about that, and there's plenty of work for all of us. So,
yeah, thanks, Simon. Amy, what's your view?
In terms of solutions and what's happening out there.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think, picking up on that point about procurement, that's front of mind too. I think we've seen recently actually tender evaluation criteria for construction contracts having requirements for diversity in supply chains, and that's starting to come through. So, you're seeing the likes of Amotai, they've got a growing number of members and partners now, and that is actually working. So procurement as a tool to drive change is something that central and local government and other entities can really consider. In terms of, I guess I talked a little bit about our image problem earlier. So for me, that is where we need to do some more work highlighting and celebrating the emerging diversity and the success stories in the industry. Those things are going to make a difference. And there's lots and lots of initiatives, and I know Simon mentioned, Girls in High Vis, and there's lots of places doing outreach into schools and communities. It's also an area where WIN can help, and probably, I always reflect with Building Nations about WIN. That was 5 years ago now that WIN was founded by the wonderful Sarah Lang, that many will know. And I remember at the time having this conversation where both of us went, there's just not that many women in this sector, are there? And what we realised pretty quickly was we were dead wrong, and there were plenty, you just didn't really see them. So now, Women in Infrastructure is about increasing the visibility of women in the sector, and there's now well over 2,000 women who are part of those 7 chapters across the country. those support networks win, and there are many others, both outside in the industry and also within some of our organisations. We have a number of them within Downer, for example. Those are making a real difference to meeting the diversity and inclusion challenge. And I think those things will over time help us with that image issue. And then I think too that just thinking a little bit more about those structural barriers that we talked about earlier, and the thing with structural barriers, Peter mentioned it before, they really only often become visible to the person who runs head first into them, and then all of a sudden, you see it, and it relies on those people having access to be able to highlight and make them visible, because there's a real drive and determination within the industry to dismantle some of those barriers. We just can't always see them all. So one of the groups that I did some work with earlier in the year, and will continue to do so, is an amazing group of young engineers, and He Wahine Kotahi. What they did was they sort of shared some experiences and recognised that all of them found it a bit tough from time to time in site-based roles, and they got to thinking, what can we do about it? So they have put together a network and a program, and the program is designed to support and build and empower and retain female grad engineers and cadets in particular. And what they're looking at the moment is how to actually harness all of those learnings from COVID disruption and prepare for the digital future, and look at the alternative work environments to actually be a vehicle to propose and trial new initiatives for flexibility on site. So, and they're also looking at greater support. So this group, they've got executive support and sponsorship, are looking for tangible solutions, and that's a really good example of going to a group who are directly impacted by a barrier and having them, that bottom-up approach, having them help to identify the solutions. So I think that's the sort of thing that works, and that we need to find more ways to support, because those solutions are going to be the enduring, successful ones.
Thanks, Amy. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Look, this is a big topic. I'm co-chair of the Construction Accord, which has got about 700 firms joining. It's a partnership between public sector and private sector, and we've launched with Diversity Works this big research study actually into our sector to have this conversation and to really find out what's working, what's not. So we've done a lot of research into contractors, specialist trades, professional services, public sector procurers, etc. And this information will come out shortly, but it'll be no surprise to those on this call that our sector is extremely fragmented, and very different needs and requirements for inclusion, diversity, either female, male, youth, gender, etc. And so, I suppose my experience has been, if I think about this, where I've seen success and the sort of things we're trying to drive into now, especially. And you've talked about it before, but leaders have to explain the why. We've got to get the why. It can't just be an agenda item. It's got to be a critical part of a sustainable future. So our purpose is making communities better for generations to come. And for generations to come is really important. So on one hand, it's a license to operate. If you don't get on board with this, sustainability, and we're all on board with this, you won't be relevant in the future. You just won't be. So secondly, from our perspective, getting that really clear link with your values and engaging the leaders that this is part of how we operate and part of what we want to be. So it goes back to that purpose and the rationale for the organisation you want. And that what that does is that holds leaders accountable. And and what I've seen you can do, and a lot of you have done this, is that if you have an organisation that's safe, or a team that's safe, and it's okay to challenge the status quo, that's when you start to get the inclusion, you start to get the ideas bubbling up. And quite often, it might not be part of your program. It might just be your healthy environment. If you get a healthy project, or it's something that Simon talked about, someone will come up with some ideas on flexible working conditions. And you can't plan that from a boardroom table. You just got to let your people come up with these ideas, but have a safe environment that we want to see this coming through. The second thing for me is just pick 2 or 3 things that are relevant for your team or your project that your team think is important. one of our teams and our projects, we've got some real issues. It's a very tough project. So we've actually got some mental health issues there that are, how do you deal with that if you're not experienced to it? And coming and bringing the people together for that particular project, they've come up with some ideas that is about flexibility, that can give people some time out. We don't work Saturday mornings. We've had to go back to the client and negotiate that. That's been highly relevant to that project. So for me, it's pick 2 or 3 things. I try to get it on the agenda so it's actually part of our leadership journey and not be too prescriptive, but there's 3 things we're driving our organisation now. One is women to leadership. So we've launched an exciting campaign with Dr. Alia Monteith, who's done a lot of work at ASB, etc. And it's around what you talked about, Katrina. It's a sponsoring and mentoring of women. So we've got about 60 odd people in our organisation that are going through this program. And just by doing something different, all of a sudden these other ideas have popped up, and you've all seen that. So leveraging in on 2 or 3 things, you can create a infection, terrible word in today's environment, but you can create the spread of ideas and allow that to germinate and just come up. And I really like that. I talked about that bottom up. So explain the why and the rationale, keep it simple, pick 2 or 3 things that really resonate for your project team or your people, make sure that it's safe, people feel safe, that they can operate that way. And it's cultural, completely cultural, and you've seen it in all your organisations, and I'm seeing it in projects. It's the blockers. Simon said you've got to get the blockers out of the way. That's the one thing that I've learned. You can work on all this good stuff, but if you've got blockers, the key initiative is get the blockers out, and it's just unacceptable in a culture. And if you can do that, you'd be surprised what I've seen unbelievable ideas come through, and people pick up ideas and initiatives because they know culturally that's a really important element of future success and to be sustainable.
Thanks, Peter. Nicky, does your research sort of align with some of the things that you've heard here today about what actually makes a difference?
Yeah, definitely, Katrina. I mean, obviously all of this is relevant. It's interesting. I've just finished a series of focus groups with women, like female engineers, specifically to test the success of different initiatives across a spectrum of different women, which has been really, been a great experience to meet some amazing women and hold those focus groups. But I think some of the key things, and definitely like from Peter and Simon, is making sure that those messages come down from exec team and that there's ownership and buy-in at the top, and that there's not for the initiative as much as for the outcome. There's this real desire to have more women in leadership, to have more women in our workforce, for women to have a voice, and those sorts of things. But then also with those initiatives, make sure that that goes down through the ranks as well, but then also that the woman or the minority that you're working with, that they also understand why this is important. So, I get the stories of someone getting an email saying you've been selected for a women in leadership course, and it's like, they don't want to be singled out. They don't understand why they need to go. Is this because I'm a bad leader? So there's really unintended consequences of some of the initiatives that we implement that actually single women out for not being competent enough to do the role or needing support. So it's really important to understand the problem. So like with anything we do, like what's the problem, and does the solution actually address the problem? And then can you measure success? And if you can't measure success, go back to what's the problem, does the solution, because if we can't measure success, then we're actually just bringing things out of the air to try and, try and make a difference. So, and not that, I don't know, doing something can sometimes be better than doing nothing, and actually sometimes it can be worse. So some of the things that I've heard that are landing well, so mentoring, and it doesn't have to be female-female mentoring. So actually female-male mentoring and male-female mentoring is really good. So your females having a male mentor, it gives your male leaders some real insight into some of those barriers, and how to develop better relationships with one-on-one relationships with female engineers. And then if you have females mentoring your young male engineers, they start to see these amazing women in leadership. So mixed gender mentoring, but mentoring is definitely helps in navigating, I guess, some of the cultural idiosyncrasies of our industry. So the other thing which we've all spoken about is this access to role models. What we find, because we have fewer women in leadership, that our young women might have 1 or 2 role models, and if they don't align with those women or don't see themselves in those women, it's really hard to picture that career path. And like Gracen says, like I be what I see. So, and if that's not you, if that leader doesn't have children or does have children and they've just taken different career paths, we need some broad role models. Celebrating those women in positions of influence. If our young females see women in the workplace that are well respected, where their voice is really well heard, that they start to go, this is a place that I can be, and as I go up the ranks, I will continue to be heard, and I don't see a glass ceiling. So there's heaps of stuff in that role models and how that's perceived. Flexible working is 100%. It's a real can be a real barrier for some of our young women. So promoting flexible working and then just making sure it actually works in reality. I think we need to start celebrating career breaks and working part-time, and the richness that brings to our industry and to our businesses. And instead of looking at it as something that we provide reluctantly, that it's a privilege, and that our women or men should be grateful to have that opportunity. So if we really embrace that, that would just start to, I guess, change some of that subconscious bias on women taking time out to prioritise family. And so the women that I spoke to, and specifically the women in construction, early in their career, they're really struggling to see how they're going to navigate staying in construction and being a mum. And so they often are leaving before they have children. And this, comes back to Megan, this is not going to suit me. And so it's really making sure that they can see, so having those conversations around career planning and how you can have a successful career in construction. You don't have to go into an office-based role. How can we make this work? And if we can't make it work, our competitors will. So, and we see lots of our women leaving construction and going into consultancy, which, they're staying in the industry at least, but we're just losing some of this real fabric of the diversity in our teams. So the other key one is definitely career planning for, like women and men. We know that it's really important for them to have access to development roles and to see that their, career is progressing and that they're getting challenged, not to the sake of mental health, but just getting enough within their careers to feel like they're doing something different. And what we see is that often with our graduate programs, there's this real structured approach to that. But then once you get into sort of 5 years plus, which is where we're starting to lose some of our women, it's much less structured. We see promotions based on relationships, and we start to see, definitely in the construction industry, informal appointments. So roles aren't advertised, and there's been someone that's been trained to come into that role. And so the people that are different or don't have access to those influential relationships, and that can be by gender or because I'm not an extrovert, they're just not getting a shoe into some of those promotions. So it's making sure that there's equal opportunity for promotions, that they're openly advertised, and that we're promoting on skill and capability and not on personality. And going back to some of the stuff that Gracen said, don't be afraid of the disruptors. If we keep promoting the people that look the same and act the same, we'll just won't get that diversity, and we definitely won't get diversity into our leadership teams.
Great, thank you, Nicky.
Yeah,
sorry, we're short on time. I need to
Thanks.
make sure that we fit in Megan.
Yeah.
So Megan, what are your thoughts on what you think the infrastructure sector should do?
I think the things you've all spoken about, you know what needs to be done, and you're on that journey. And I'm sorry, I'll come back to being an engineer. No, it's probably a bit late. And I think I'm preaching to the converted, but we know lip service doesn't work. It has to be a real priority, and I think it was Simon or Peter who said that just a moment ago. It has to be a priority from the top down. You have to measure it. You have to report it. It has to be in your annual report. You have to be hand on heart talking about it. Absolutely, get rid of that unconscious bias. The unconscious is the key word in that phrase there. We don't know we've got it. We have to have that light shone on it for ourselves. It's quite insidious in workplaces. It's insidious in society, and I think it's no doubt it's insidious in the infrastructure sector. And if you can, make sure you've closed that money gap, make it attractive for anyone coming into the industry. My last point really is take some risks. If you've got a couple of candidates for a role, one's the safe choice, one's a little bit risky, but they've both got the capability, take the risk. And I found just in doing a bit of Google research too, even old people can Google, Australia's got the same sort of rates of women in infrastructure, 18%. And I saw a note about a project at a girls' school where the construction company chose to have 50% women on that construction site, which would have been a fabulous sort of signal to the girls at that school. But the project finished early, it finished under budget, and there was some nice tidy research around it showing that that's not a coincidence. So that's just maybe a little thought to leave you with from a retired engineer.
Thanks very much, Megan. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A. I think we've got 2 minutes left. There is a question that is a bit of a segue from what you mentioned, and I wondered what your thoughts are about quotas. They're a bit controversial, but it sounds like that Australian project you refer to could well have been deliberately set up like that.
Someone said to me the other day, 1 woman is a lone wolf, 2 is a sidebar conversation, 3 is a bit of critical mass, and this was in the context of boards. There's research that says you need 40% women to have critical mass, whether it's a project or a workplace. I've never really been a fan of quotas, but as I guess at this stage of my career, I'm a bit in the do whatever it takes camp these days. So that's a way of answering it without answering it.
It's interesting that was a really key point. We've got a woman in the construction network across Fletcher, and I've attended a number of the sessions, and this came up, and there was absolute. Our people did not want to see secure and operational roles due to a target, and it was really strong about that, which I agree with. However, as a senior leader, unfortunately, what gets measured gets done, and we've got some targets across our group around moving women into operational leadership roles, and I can tell you now that it needs an intervention. Sometimes the CEO's got to drive an intervention and hold people accountable. But I agree with Megan's comment. It has also surprised me how easy it is for a senior leader to make a courageous call, and the optics are significant. But the leaders don't realise that just making a courageous call and giving someone an opportunity that you might not have, the power of that. And I'm really encouraged by some of the leaders I see who are making those courageous decisions, and how it makes a huge difference. But having the courage to do that, because they realise that it's not about the plan, it's actually about some of the decisions we all make as leaders to break down values, break down boundaries, and give someone opportunities they might not have had before.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. I think we're out of time, everyone, but what a fantastic discussion. Thank you all for your contribution. It's been great. And I think, Gracen, I hand over now to you.
Yes.
To speak. Yes, great.
Kia ora again, everyone. I'm sure you're all aware now that I am the 2021 chair of the Emerging Talent Network, which some of you may know as ET, of Infrastructure New Zealand. So ET has been around around 5 years now and was established to provide career development, networking opportunities, and a community for professionals in early stages of their career in the infrastructure sector. We connect, we grow, and we shine a light on our infrastructure professionals, and we certainly consider ourselves to be the younger, more progressive cousin of INZ, packed full with individuals that will be leading the industry in the future. Our evident aspiration for the industry has always felt a bit conflicted by our branding. So earlier this year, we started the journey to review this in the context that helps our network and those championing us to better communicate with our narrative and better represent who we are. So we ran an exercise within our committee to understand how we'd like to be perceived. We want the network to be perceived as a best practice, offering and support development and representation of the future leaders in the infrastructure sector. We want to be accessible, knowledgeable, friendly, while contributing to the betterment of our sector and society. We also thought our logo was a little bit off-brand, showing a road which contradicted that low-carbon transport future we all desire here in ET. We also did a kind of test on brand personality and assessed current versus aspirational. And as you can see from that graphic on the screen, we reviewed where we are now and where we would like to be. This chart identifies those two positions on a series of sliding scales. Since the network was conceived, it has grown from a career development and networking opportunity to providing a voice to grow and share talent within the industry's future leaders. We've also identified that our direct audience in the industry, professionals in the first 10, 15 years of their career, and we're really, really thankful for all of the fantastic voices and commitment we get from this sector. We provide events, we are obviously on social media, and we thank all of our current sponsors and those that we're going to work with in future for events in the private sector or anywhere else. So we felt our current branding did not align with these points, so we got together and came up with something new. Announcing the Infrastructure Collective. For us, this new name represents all that we are within and beyond the network. So youthful, dynamic, transformative, bold, professional, acknowledging our network's priorities, growth, development, diversity, and passion. There will also be a visual piece to the logo, so keep an eye out in the few weeks to come. And coming under the umbrella of Infrastructure New Zealand and working together with the other networks like WIN, we hope to continue to advocate the diversity agenda in the years to come and make our voices heard in the industry. We have a lot of awesome plans in the pipeline for next year, so keep an eye out for that information. And if you have any team members or you yourself are not part of the Infrastructure Collective and interested in joining, please reach out to myself or the INZ team and we'll get you signed up. We've also got 2 opportunities to join our committee coming up in the new year, so keep your ears peeled. Thanks so much, everyone, and it's been a great session.
Thanks, Gracen, and thanks for launching the Infrastructure Collective. Great to see that, and great to see the plan, energy and enthusiasm from the collective. Thank you for that. Thank you to all our speakers from this afternoon's session on diversity. And the speakers have traversed the challenges of breaking down the barriers. And probably key to this, from what I heard, is the key to normalising diversity is making fundamental changes to dismantle the barriers. And Peter Reidy's comments just at the end of the question time around that this may well require intervention. So probably enough of waiting and hoping that things will happen and more around actually getting on and getting it done. And when you look at the Building Nations video, it talks about the fact that we want to create a future that we want to inhabit. And surely we want to inhabit a future that celebrates, welcomes, and supports diversity and inclusion. So perhaps a best way for me to sum up what I've heard today, and this is a quote that I've used before, it's from C.S. Lewis, and it simply says, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." And I think that's a really powerful message for us today in terms of diversity. Thank you for everyone who's attended and provided the questions. Thank you to Denton, Kensington, Swan as a session sponsor, and thank you, Katrina, for facilitating. This session is now finished, and I direct attendees to the next session, which is the New Zealand Draft Infrastructure Strategy with Jeff Cooper. Mati wai, and thank you.